Welcome to the JT Sports Podcast. If you live, eat, breathe, and sleep football, this is the right place for you. We're talking NFL, college football, 24/7, 365 days throughout the year. If you love the NFL and college football just as much as I do, this is the right place for you. Smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and hit that bell icon so you don't miss when we drop new content. The Dallas Cowboys are parting ways with head coach Mike McCarthy after failing to come to agreement on a new contract extension with them. And Jerry Jones and his organization are greatly going to regret allowing Mike McCarthy to walk out of this organization, because Mike McCarthy is a really good head coach. He's really overhated. He's not a great coach, but he's good enough to where if you hire him, you're guaranteed to win a lot of games, make it to the playoffs. And if you're the Chicago Bears or the New Orleans Saints, if you hire Mike McCarthy, you're getting a hell of a coach, especially if the Bears pull the trigger on him, because if you give Mike McCarthy a promising young quarterback in Caleb Williams to work with, I guarantee that he's going to have success, because Dak Prescott had one of his best seasons ever under Mike McCarthy as the head coach, when he ended up finishing as an MVP candidate and he leads Dallas to the playoffs, and ultimately they don't really go that far as always. But I don't blame the Cowboys' shortcomings on Mike McCarthy. We all know who deserves 110% of the blame for the Cowboys being unable to make it to a Super Bowl, constantly having disappointment after disappointment come playoff time, and that's Jerry Jones, the owner. With Mike McCarthy getting the opportunity to get a fresh start under ownership that won't be as controlling and won't meddle as much as Jerry Jones does, he has a great opportunity to have more success wherever he goes with his new team than what he ever had with the Cowboys. You're not going to be able to hire any of the top head coaching candidates out there, rather that be Ben Johnson or Eric Glenn or whoever else, because for one, nobody's going to want to be Jerry Jones' puppet, and two, you drag your feet with this Mike McCarthy contract situation to the point where you're in the back of the line when it comes to any interviews with the top head coaching candidates, and who look like was going to be your top candidate during the majority of the season. And Bill Belichick, he has reaffirmed that he is not leaving North Carolina for the NFL for the time being. So you missed out on him. The Cowboys are in a situation where you're just going to end up hiring whoever you can get. He's not going to be qualified for the job, and you're going to end up being even worse these next couple of years with whoever you hire as your new head coach than what you were these last couple of years with Mike McCarthy. Mike McCarthy has several double-digit winning seasons. He was able to win a playoff game. It's not like every time the Cowboys went to the postseason under Mike McCarthy, they instantly got one and done. You know, he did beat Tom Brady in his final game ever. So Mike McCarthy has had as much success as you possibly can when you have Jerry Jones as your boss. It's really hard to have success in a workplace where you constantly have your boss hanging over you, telling you what to do, trying to run you like a puppet, like you're a slappy dummy or something like that. I'm happy for Mike McCarthy that he gets the opportunity to prove himself elsewhere. Hell, I hope that the Jaguars hire Mike McCarthy, because he has shown that he's really good at quarterbacks and he knows how to build a good culture conducive to winning wherever he goes. You can do a lot worse than Mike McCarthy. I'm not saying that he's a great coach, but what I am saying is that he's a good enough coach that for Dallas to let him just walk out of the building like this and not have a candidate in mind to be a suitable replacement for him is going to put them in a lot of trouble moving forward. Plus, with the upcoming contract talks that they're going to have with Michael Parsons, and for as much talent as what they've lost over these last couple of years, and Jerry Jones' incompetence to put together a Super Bowl caliber roster, you're just going to be in this constant cycle of disappointment and underachieving, even worse than what you were under Mike McCarthy with whoever you have to take over this head coaching job. And I don't think that they're going to go about it the right way, because it's hard to go about it the right way when you have an owner that just is so delusional. When you hear Jerry Jones talk, he always talks about how he bought this team to run it, not to allow somebody else to run it. And the Cowboys aren't going to win another Super Bowl, or at least have an opportunity to win another Super Bowl, until he ends up passing away and he gives the reins over to his sons. And I'm pretty confident that his sons are going to be the same way. He probably is going to end up telling his sons, no matter what happens, no matter how bad things get, y'all never let somebody outside the family to have control of making decisions when it comes to this team, because that's the kind of person that Jerry Jones is. So with this decision to allow Mike McCarthy to go, I think Jerry Jones is going to regret it, because this is the best coach that he possibly could have had, that was willing to tolerate his nonsense, that was willing to tolerate his constant meddling, his constant distractions that he imposed on this team. It's a really big red flag when you have an owner that does his own media runs throughout the week. Normally, the owners are supposed to be the most quiet part of your organization, because they hire you to do a job. But Jerry Jones always has to be in the spotlight. He always has to get all the credit and none of the blame. You know, this is just going to be a terrible decision when we look at this in hindsight, because Mike McCarthy is a really good coach, and I think that he is greatly overhated. It looks like Tom Brady is about to make the Las Vegas Raiders great again. Ben Johnson is the odds-on favorite to end up getting this Raiders head coaching job, and it all is due in part to Tom Brady as minority owner. It came out earlier today that Ben Johnson, he gave the Raiders an interview when he didn't plan on giving them one, because of a convincing phone call that he had from Tom Brady. And Tom Brady, not only is he the greatest quarterback in NFL history, but he's one of the greatest football minds as well. And he knows what it takes to build a winner. He played under a winner in Bill Belichick, along with several other Hall of Fame players and future Hall of Fame players. Tom Brady, if I have to put my faith in anybody to be able to make the Raiders a watchable team and to drag this franchise out of the pit of misery that they put this fan base through over the last 2 decades, Tom Brady is the right guy for the job. And Mark Davis allowing him to become the minority owner and leaning on him heavily for football decisions, I think is one of the best moves that Mark Davis has ever made. When Antonio Pierce and Tom Telesco got fired, I felt like Tom Brady had his fingerprints all over those moves, because when Tom Brady reaches out to you, you're going to listen. Nobody's going to turn down a phone call from Tom Brady. And Tom Brady is such a well-likable person that it's hard to turn him down. If you're Ben Johnson, you're talking to one of the greats. You're talking to somebody who has been the face of the league for several decades. You know, I'm really shocked that Ben Johnson is probably going to end up becoming the next head coach of the Raiders, because I never would have thought that the Raiders would be able to lure a coaching candidate that's been viewed in such a high regard as what Ben Johnson is. Ben Johnson potentially taking this Raiders head coaching job is the equivalent to when the 49ers were able to hire Kyle Shanahan. Is it going to be an overnight success? No, it's not. There definitely is going to be a lot of growing pains that Ben Johnson is going to have to go through during his first season if he ends up being the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders. But once he gets his quarterback in place, and once they continue to build up this roster and add more pieces to it, the Raiders are quickly going to become a Super Bowl contender. And if the Raiders want to be able to win in the division that's home to Jim Harbaugh, Andy Reid, and Sean Payton, with 2 really good quarterbacks in Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert, and maybe eventually Bo Nix down the line, you gotta have a transcendent head coach to be able to survive in what probably is going to be the toughest division in the NFL, that being the AFC West. And Ben Johnson would be a home run hire for the Raiders. This would be the best hire that the Raiders have ever made in the history of their franchise outside of bringing in John Madden. That's how good of a coach Ben Johnson is going to be. He's perceived to be the next coming of Sean McVay, with how creative he is with his offensive schemes, how he utilizes motion to create a lot of space on the field, how he's able to find so many different creative ways to get his best athletes, his best playmakers, the hands on the football. I don't see how Ben Johnson ends up not working out as the head coach of the Las Vegas Raiders, especially when you have Tom Brady overseeing a lot of the personnel decisions. Ben Johnson, he probably is going to bring in his own general manager. I hope that it's Chris Spielman. If you don't know who Chris Spielman is, he's been the left-hand man to Brad Holmes. And if you're familiar with former Minnesota Vikings general manager Rick Spielman, who drafted several high-level players like Justin Jefferson, he's going to be a really good general manager hire if that ends up being the guy that Ben Johnson brings along with him, which I have a strong intuition that it will be, because I don't really think that he will bring along anybody else. When people talk about how good of a job Brad Holmes has done when it comes to building up and acquiring talent for the Detroit Lions to become the team that they have over these last couple of years, a lot of diehard Lions fans always bring up Chris Spielman and how he also has had a little bit of his fingerprints when it comes to the blueprint the Lions have followed to become the contender that they've been over these last couple of years under Dan Campbell. And Tom Brady, not only is he a brilliant football mind, but he's a great leader. That's something that everybody has always praised Tom Brady for, being able to instill accountability not only into the organization, but to the locker room, is what the Raiders are going to need if they're ever going to be able to compete in the AFC West with so many great coaches. And I know that I've been really negative about the Las Vegas Raiders over these last couple of years. It's not like the negativity has been unwarranted, but now with Tom Brady at the helm, I got optimism about the direction that the Raiders are going in. And I've been around for 22 going on 23 years in March. And I've only seen the Raiders make it to the playoffs only maybe 2-3 times during my lifespan on this earth. So the fact that you now have a reason to be optimistic now with Tom Brady being a minority owner and running the show, if you're a Raiders fan, it's a great time to be one. It's a great time to actually have hope. We don't know how you're going to address the quarterback position, but I wouldn't worry about that. Tom Brady's making the decisions, and he's going to be trusted to make the right ones, and I definitely believe that he's the right person to be able to resurrect the Las Vegas Raiders franchise. Mike Tomlin's famous mantra is how the standard is the standard, but the new standard in Pittsburgh under him seems to be mediocrity, because that's what the Steelers have been these last 8-9 years under Mike Tomlin. You want to know what's insane? The Jaguars and the Browns, two of the worst ran franchises in the NFL, have more playoff wins than what the Steelers have in the last 9 years. You wouldn't expect that when you think of how poorly ran both the Browns and the Jaguars have been, and how the Steelers are perceived to be the gold standard for what a well-ran organization looks like. But Mike Tomlin, he only gets praise for never having a losing season. But yet, when it comes to being able to have success in the postseason, though, this team always underachieves. You see, the standard in Pittsburgh is to compete for Super Bowls, not to make it to the playoffs. Making it to the playoffs is the bare minimum, because that's to be expected. Mike Tomlin has been doing the bare minimum to keep his job. He's not doing enough to get the Steelers playing back to the standard that they used to play out, which is constantly being in a Super Bowl conversation. When's the last time the Steelers ever went into a season with Super Bowl expectations? It's been a very long time. Mike Tomlin has had future Hall of Fame players that still are on this squad that have yet to have a playoff win. TJ Watt, Mika Fitzpatrick. You know, I feel bad for TJ Watt, for him to have such a great career, to be a future first ballot Hall of Famer, but to not have a taste of success in the postseason, it's an indictment and it's a crime on Mike Tomlin's behalf, because a guy like TJ Watt should be playing in the biggest games and the biggest stage in late January. Against the Baltimore Ravens and the Steelers' wild card round loss, during that game, you had Herb Herbstreit and Al Michaels questioning the heart of the Steelers. That's something that I thought would never be a question when it came to a Mike Tomlin coach team. You can say what you want about the offense always being terrible, the defense underperforming every time they go up against the elite quarterback, but something that I never thought would be a question is the heart that the Steelers will play with under Mike Tomlin, for somebody who's supposed to be a player's coach, for somebody who always has a lot of respect and admiration out of his locker room. You didn't see that this past weekend. And we know that Mike Tomlin isn't going anywhere. He's not going to get fired. He has a no trade clause. Mike Tomlin is only going to go when he wants to go. But the big issues with the Steelers are that you have a head coach who is labeled to be elite, but yet he doesn't have a good coaching tree. Mike Tomlin, when's the last time he ever had an offensive coordinator or a defensive coordinator that got hired to become a head coach? Elite head coaches put their coordinators into position to become head coaches. Because when you have a head coach that constantly wins, that constantly makes the right hires, other teams want to replicate that formula. But for some reason, no other franchise in the NFL wants to replicate Mike Tomlin's formula from anybody that's coaching under him. One of the biggest mistakes that Mike Tomlin has made was keeping Terrell Austin as a defensive coordinator over Brian Flores. There's no reason why Brian Flores should have ever been allowed to leave the building of the Pittsburgh Steelers unless he was leaving for a head coaching opportunity. It makes me sick to know that Brian Flores is dominating as a defensive coordinator for the Minnesota Vikings when the Steelers had this guy right underneath their nose and Mike Tomlin let him walk out. It makes me really upset how the Steelers continue to have a terrible offense year after year and no plan at quarterback under Mike Tomlin. I'm not going to give him all the blame for how this team has constantly underachieved, because some of this blame does have to fall on Amar Khan. The failure to find a long-term solution at quarterback, the constant whiffs in the first round. Let's be honest about Broderick Jones. We've seen enough out of him these last couple of years to know that he's a bust. It doesn't take this long to find out if you have a franchise offensive tackle or not. And Broderick Jones is another miss that the Steelers have made when it comes to a first-round selection on offense. Najee Harris, he's a huge miss. He's not a bust, but he's not what you expect out of a first-round back. When you drive a running back in the first round of the draft, you expect to see an explosive athlete. Saquon Barkley, every time he touches the ball, you see the explosiveness. You see the home run threat. You don't see that out of Najee Harris. The Pittsburgh Steelers, under Mike Tomlin, they've become a franchise that's been okay with the bare minimum. They've been okay with mediocrity. They've been okay with never having a losing season, but never being able to get anywhere further than the first round of the NFL playoffs, because that's what the new standard is under Mike Tomlin. We now, as Steeler fans, have to be okay with mediocrity because we want to give participation trophies to a guy who can win in the regular season but can't win when it matters the most. Having a winning season doesn't define if the Steelers had a successful season or not. What defines how successful of a season the Steelers have had all depends on what they do in the postseason, because that's to be expected when you coach for an organization that's rooted in so much tradition and pageantry. When you think about the NFL and you think about the history of this league, you always think about Pittsburgh. You think of Terry Bradshaw, Lynn Swann, the still current defense with Mean Joe Green. And to have so much history and for the standard to constantly go down every single season under Mike Tomlin is a really big disappointment. And I'm tired of Mike Tomlin. I want to see a change. I know it's not going to happen, but it needs to happen because they're doing nothing but just walking in place. You know, Mike Tomlin always has great quotables. And one of my favorite ones that he had this year is that insanity is doing the same thing over again and getting the same results. But that's what he continues to do. That's what this franchise continues to do. You know, I don't know who deserves the boatload of the blame for what the Steelers have constantly been these last couple of years. But Mike Tomlin, I'm going to give him the most of it because let's not act like he didn't waste the prime years of the Killer Bees when you had Le'Veon Bell, Antonio Brown, and Big Ben Roethlisberger. He was underachieving with those guys. He lost to an interim head coach when they went up against the Cleveland Browns in the wild card round in 2020. I will never forget when the Steelers lost, having home field advantage and the first round bye to Blake Bortles and Leonard Fournette. I'm sick of the excuses when it comes to Mike Tomlin. He may be a good head coach. He may be able to go elsewhere and have success. But you can't keep asking, who are we going to hire that's going to be better than Mike Tomlin? When you're in a relationship that isn't working out, you don't keep holding on to it just because you're scared you can't find nothing better. How do you know if you can't do better if you at least don't try? And the Steelers aren't trying. They keep holding on to a guy that obviously has peaked. Sometimes you have great head coaches that they do all they can do. They reach a certain level with the organization, and they're unable to go any further. Prime example, Andy Reid with the Philadelphia Eagles. He was never able to win a Super Bowl in all his years being the head coach of the Eagles. So what did they do? They fired him. They brought in Doug Peterson, and boom, they won a Super Bowl. And Andy Reid eventually ended up winning the Super Bowl when he got Patrick Mahomes when he became the head coach of the Kansas City Chiefs. Even if you give Mike Tomlin the quarterback, the defense still sucks. The defense still continues to get shredded up every time they go up against an elite offense led by an elite quarterback. Lamar Jackson, before halftime during this wild card round loss, he was playing around with the Steelers defense. I mean, the dude was running around, throwing touchdowns, and then immediately going to the locker room before the half ended. The Ravens didn't take the Steelers seriously. During Hard Knocks, John Harbaugh was saying how you don't really have to worry too much about Russell Wilson because he's nothing to be worried about. He's not going to throw in the middle of the field. The only thing he's going to throw is moon balls downfield and check downs to the running backs, and that's it. Mediocrity is the standard in Pittsburgh now under Mike Tomlin, and that's what us as Steelers fans have to be okay with because we shouldn't be mad at a head coach who's never had a losing season. We should be okay with a head coach who constantly underachieves come playoff time when this is a franchise that has never been defined about having a winning season, being happy to make it to the playoffs. This is a franchise that has built the reputation that they've built, that has had the tradition and the history that they've had because they've been known for getting it done in the biggest moment during the biggest stretch of the season, which is making deep playoff runs and winning Super Bowls.